Mr. Harold Bennett, a man who once commanded rooms with his presence and power, now lies weak and frail in a hospital bed. The room is quiet, save for the faint beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses outside the door. It's a stark contrast to the life Harold once led, a life filled with luxury, influence, and the company of high society. Yet despite all the wealth and success, Harold is haunted by a deep, unshakable sorrow. Years ago, in the prime of his life, Harold's daughter, Elizabeth, disappeared without a trace. The circumstances were mysterious, and despite exhaustive searches and investigations, she was never found. The loss of his only child shattered Harold in ways he never thought possible, leaving a void that no amount of money could fill. The years passed, but the pain of losing Elizabeth never dulled. It gnawed at him, growing stronger as he aged, especially now that his own life was drawing to a close. As his health rapidly declines, Harold finds himself overwhelmed by a sense of loneliness and regret. His once powerful body is now frail, and his sharp mind, though still intact, is clouded with memories and what-ifs. The thought of dying alone without ever seeing his daughter again is unbearable. It is in this moment of desperation that Harold makes a decision, one that is both unusual and desperate. One quiet afternoon, Harold's nurse, Emily, enters the room for her usual rounds. She is a young woman with a kind face and gentle demeanor, qualities that Harold has come to appreciate in his final days. Emily approaches the bed with her usual calm, checking his vitals and adjusting his pillows. Harold watches her in silence, his mind racing with the thoughts he has been mulling over for days. Finally, gathering his courage, Harold speaks. His voice is weak, but there is a determination in his tone that catches Emily off guard. "Emily," he begins, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that belies his frailty. "I have a favor to ask of you. It's not something I would ask lightly." Emily pauses, sensing the gravity of his words. "Of course, Mr. Bennett. What do you need?" she asks, her voice gentle and reassuring. Harold takes a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the effort. "I want you to pretend to be my daughter. Just for a week. Please, just pretend that you are Elizabeth." Emily is stunned by the request. She feels a wave of emotions, shock, confusion, and a deep sympathy for the old man lying before her. She knows how much Elizabeth meant to him. It's something that the nurses often whispered about in the halls, the tragic story of the millionaire who lost his daughter. But to pretend to be her? It's an unusual request, one that Emily isn't sure she can fulfill. Seeing her hesitation, Harold's eyes soften, and he continues, his voice tinged with desperation. "I know it's a strange thing to ask, but I don't have much time left, and the thought of dying without seeing my daughter's face again, even if it's just a pretense, it's unbearable, Emily. Please, just for a week. I know it's not real, but it would bring me peace." Emily feels her heart ache for Harold. She has seen many patients in her career, some who faced death with courage, others with fear, but none who carried the burden of such profound loss. Harold's plea is not just about comfort in his final days. It's a last grasp at the life he once had, a life that was ripped away from him when Elizabeth disappeared. After a long pause, Emily nods slowly. "If it will bring you peace, Mr. Bennett, I will do it. I will be your daughter for a week." Harold's eyes fill with tears, and for the first time in years, a genuine smile spreads across his face. "Thank you, Emily," he whispers, his voice breaking with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." And so the strange charade begins. Emily starts visiting Harold more frequently, sitting by his bedside and engaging in conversations as if she were Elizabeth. At first, it feels awkward and forced. Emily struggles to find the right words, unsure of how to step into the role of a daughter she never knew. But Harold, despite his frailty, guides her gently. He talks about Elizabeth's childhood, her favorite books, the way she used to laugh, details that help Emily to better understand the woman she is pretending to be. As the days pass, something unexpected happens. The awkwardness begins to fade, replaced by a growing bond between Harold and Emily. The lines between reality and pretense blur as they share stories, laugh at old memories, and even cry together. Emily finds herself becoming emotionally invested in the role, not just out of duty, but out of genuine care for Harold. She sees the man behind the wealth and power, a father who has lived with unimaginable pain and guilt. Harold, too, feels a change within himself. For the first time in years, he feels a sense of peace. The emptiness that had consumed him for so long starts to fade, replaced by the warmth of connection. Even though he knows that Emily is not truly Elizabeth, her presence fills a void that he thought would never be filled again. The week progresses, and each day brings a new depth to their interactions. Emily finds herself looking forward to her visits with Harold, eager to hear more about his life and share in the memories of a daughter she never met, but now feels she knows intimately. Harold, in turn, begins to open up about his regrets, the mistakes he made, and the things he wishes he could change. Emily listens with compassion, offering comfort where she can, but more importantly, simply being there for him. As the seventh day approaches, both Harold and Emily are acutely aware that their time together is coming to an end. The thought of returning to the reality where Harold is alone and Emily is just a nurse is a painful one. Yet there is also a sense of closure, a feeling that, in this short time, they have both found something they were searching for. Harold, the comfort of a daughter's presence, and Emily, the understanding of a man's profound love and loss. On the final day, Emily sits by Harold's bedside, holding his hand as they talk quietly. The room is filled with a sense of peace, the tension and pain of the past week having been replaced by a gentle acceptance. Harold looks at Emily, his eyes filled with gratitude and love, and says, "You have given me a gift I never thought I would receive. You have been my daughter, and for that I am eternally grateful." Tears well up in Emily's eyes as she squeezes his hand. "It was an honor, Mr. Bennett. You've taught me more about love and loss in this week than I could ever have imagined." As the sun sets on the seventh day, casting a warm glow over the room, Harold closes his eyes, a contented smile on his face. Emily stays by his side, holding his hand until the very end, knowing that in those final moments, Harold found the peace he had been searching for. In the days that followed her decision to pretend to be Elizabeth, Emily found herself spending more time with Harold than she had ever expected. The hospital room that had once felt cold and clinical now held a strange warmth, a warmth that grew with each passing day. Emily would enter Harold's room in the morning, and his eyes would light up with a joy that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. It was the look of a father who had been given a second chance. Harold would greet her with a smile, his voice tinged with affection as he said, "Good morning, Elizabeth." The name felt foreign on Emily's lips when she first responded, but as the days went by, it began to feel almost natural. She would return his greeting, pulling up a chair beside his bed, and they would talk for hours. At first, their conversations were light, filled with small talk and shared memories of a daughter Emily had never met. Harold would recount stories of Elizabeth's childhood, how she loved to play in the garden, her fascination with butterflies, and the way her laughter would fill the house. Emily listened intently, absorbing every detail, her heart aching for the man before her. She could see the love in his eyes as he spoke of Elizabeth, a love that had never faded despite the years of her absence. It was clear that Elizabeth had been the center of Harold's world, and her disappearance had left a gaping hole in his heart. As the days passed, Harold began to open up more about his life, sharing stories of his successes and the choices that had shaped his journey. He spoke of the empire he had built, the deals he had struck, and the power he had wielded. But there was a sadness in his voice, a deep regret that lingered in every word. Emily soon realized that despite all his wealth and accomplishments, Harold's greatest sorrow was not the loss of his fortune or the fading of his power. It was the disappearance of his daughter. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room, Harold shared the story of the day Elizabeth disappeared. His voice trembled as he spoke, and Emily could see the pain in his eyes, the raw wound that had never healed. "It was a day like any other," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was supposed to meet me for lunch, but she never showed up. At first, I thought she had just lost track of time, but when hours passed and there was no sign of her, I knew something was wrong." Harold paused, taking a deep breath as if gathering the strength to continue. "We searched everywhere. every corner of the city, every person who might have seen her. But she was gone. Just gone. No trace, no clues, nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Tears welled up in Harold's eyes as he looked at Emily, his expression one of anguish and desperation. I never stopped looking for her, you know. Even after the police gave up, I kept searching. I hired private investigators, offered rewards, did everything I could think of. But it was all in vain. She was just gone. Emily felt her own heart breaking as she listened to Harold's story. She had never imagined the depth of his pain, the torment he had endured all these years. She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently in a gesture of comfort. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through." Harold gave her a sad smile, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Elizabeth," he said softly. "Just having you here. It means more to me than you'll ever know." As the days went on, Emily found herself becoming more and more immersed in the role of Elizabeth. At first, she had approached it as a duty, something she was doing to bring comfort to a dying man. But now it was different. The more time she spent with Harold, the more she began to care for him, not just as a patient, but as a person. She saw the man behind the wealth and power, the father who had been broken by the loss of his daughter, and she couldn't help but feel a deep connection to him. Harold, too, seemed to sense the growing bond between them. He would look at Emily with a tenderness that spoke of the love he had once felt for Elizabeth, a love that had been rekindled by her presence. He began to share more of himself with her, opening up about his regrets and the mistakes he had made. He spoke of the choices he wished he could take back, the things he wished he had done differently. Emily listened with a heavy heart, feeling the weight of his words. She knew that the deception was growing deeper with each passing day, and it was becoming harder to separate the role she was playing from the person she was. She found herself caring for Harold in a way she had never anticipated, and it scared her. The bond between them was real, but it was built on a lie that she knew would eventually have to come to an end. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the room was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Harold turned to Emily with a look of deep affection. "You know, Elizabeth," he said quietly, "I've always regretted not telling you how much you meant to me. I was so focused on my work, on building my empire, that I lost sight of what was truly important. But having you here now, it's like I've been given a second chance, a chance to make things right." Emily felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to his words. She knew that she was not truly Elizabeth, that the connection they had was based on a falsehood. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that Harold had found some measure of peace, some solace in his final days. And for that, she was willing to bear the burden of the deception. As the week progressed, the bond between Harold and Emily grew stronger. They would spend hours talking, laughing, and sharing memories, some real, some fabricated. Emily found herself looking forward to her visits with Harold, eager to hear more of his stories and to see the light in his eyes when he spoke of the past. She began to care for him in a way that went beyond her role as a nurse, and she knew that she was no longer just pretending to be his daughter. She was becoming someone he could rely on, someone he could trust. But with each passing day, the weight of the deception grew heavier. Emily knew that the charade could not go on forever, that eventually the truth would have to come out. She began to feel a deep sense of guilt, a gnawing fear that she was betraying the trust that Harold had placed in her. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to end it. The bond they had formed was too strong, too real to be dismissed as mere pretense. Harold, for his part, seemed to sense that something was troubling Emily. He would watch her with a concerned expression, his brow furrowed in worry. "Is everything all right, Elizabeth?" he would ask, his voice filled with genuine concern. Emily would force a smile, nodding as she tried to push aside her guilt. "Yes, everything's fine, Dad," she would reply, using the term of endearment that had become second nature to her. But deep down, she knew that the lie was taking its toll on her. The bond she had formed with Harold was real, but it was built on a foundation of deceit. And as much as she wanted to bring him comfort in his final days, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was betraying him. As the final day of the week approached, Emily found herself dreading the moment when she would have to reveal the truth. She knew that Harold's time was running out, that he would not live much longer. But she also knew that she could not continue the charade forever. The bond they had formed was too important, too precious, to be tainted by a lie. On the last day of the week, Emily entered Harold's room with a heavy heart. She knew that this would be the last day she would spend as Elizabeth, the last day she would be able to bring him the comfort of a daughter's presence. Harold greeted her with a warm smile, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "Good morning, Elizabeth," he said, his voice filled with affection. Emily forced a smile, her heart aching as she took his hand. "Good morning, Dad," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion. They spent the day talking, sharing stories, and reminiscing about the past. But as the sun began to set, Emily knew that the time had come to end the deception. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage as she prepared to tell Harold the truth. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." Harold looked at her with a concerned expression, his brow furrowing in worry. "What is it, Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emily took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm not really Elizabeth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not your daughter." Harold's eyes widened in shock, his face paling as he processed her words. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked at him, her heart breaking at the pain she saw in his expression. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Bennet," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to bring you comfort in your final days. I thought that pretending to be Elizabeth would help you find some peace." Harold stared at her in silence, his eyes filled with a mix of shock, confusion, and hurt. For a moment, Emily feared that he would be angry, that he would lash out at her for the deception. But then, to her surprise, Harold's expression softened and a sad smile spread across his face. "I knew," he said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of resignation and acceptance. "I knew you weren't really Elizabeth, but I didn't care. You brought me peace, Emily. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever, a connection to the daughter I loved more than anything in this world." Tears streamed down Emily's face as she listened to his words, her heart breaking at the realization that Harold had known the truth all along. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you." Harold squeezed her hand gently, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding love. "You didn't hurt me, Emily," he said softly. "You gave me a gift that I will cherish for the rest of my days. You made me feel like I wasn't alone, like I still had something to live for. And for that, I will always be grateful." Emily felt a sob rise in her throat as she looked at him, her heart aching with a mix of love and guilt. "I'll stay with you, Mr. Bennet," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll stay with you until the very end." Harold smiled at her, his eyes filled with a peace that she had never seen before. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." As the sun set on their final day together, Emily stayed by Harold's side, holding his hand as he slipped away. She felt a deep sense of loss as he took his final breath, but also a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had brought him comfort in his final days. The bond they had formed, though built on a deception, was real, and it was something that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. And as she sat by Harold's side, tears streaming down her face, Emily knew that she had not just played a role. She had been a daughter to a man who had lost his own. And in doing so, she had found a connection that would stay with her forever. The fifth day began like any other. Emily arrived at the hospital early in the morning, her thoughts filled with the growing bond she had developed with Harold over the past week. She had come to care for him deeply, far beyond what she had ever expected when she agreed to his unusual request. The days spent pretending to be his daughter had brought her closer to him than she could have imagined, and she found herself dreading the end of their time together. But today felt different. There was a strange tension in the air, a sense of unease that Emily couldn't quite shake. She pushed the feeling aside, reminding herself that she was here to bring comfort to Harold in his final days. As she entered his room, she was greeted by his usual warm smile, the one that made her heart ache with a mix of affection and guilt. "Good morning, Elizabeth," Harold said softly, his voice filled with the familiar warmth that had come to define their relationship. "Good morning, Dad," Emily replied, forcing a smile as she took her usual seat beside his bed. They spent the morning talking about the past, sharing stories and memories that had become a part of their daily routine. But Emily couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach, the sense that something was about to happen, something that would change everything. As the day wore on, Harold grew tired, and Emily decided to give him some time to rest. She stood by the window, gazing out at the city below, her mind racing with thoughts of the past week. She knew that their time together was drawing to a close, that soon she would have to reveal the truth about who she really was. The thought filled her with dread, but she knew it was inevitable. Just as she was about to leave for the night, there was a knock on the door. Emily turned, her heart skipping a beat as the door slowly opened. In walked a woman, tall and elegant, with an air of authority that commanded attention. Behind her was a man in a dark suit, his expression serious as he carried a briefcase at his side. Emily's heart raced as she realized who the woman was: Harold's estranged wife, Margaret. Margaret hadn't been mentioned much during their conversations, but Emily knew from the few times Harold had spoken of her that their relationship had been strained for years. The sight of her now, standing in the doorway with a lawyer at her side, sent a wave of panic through Emily. She stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. Harold, who had been resting, opened his eyes at the sound of the door. When he saw Margaret, his expression shifted from surprise to a mix of confusion and wariness. "Margaret," he said, his voice tinged with both surprise and caution, "what are you doing here?" Margaret stepped into the room, her gaze shifting from Harold to Emily. There was something in her eyes that Emily couldn't quite decipher, a mix of sadness, determination, and something else. Something that sent a chill down her spine. "Harold," Margaret began, her voice calm but firm, "there's something we need to discuss." Harold frowned, glancing at the lawyer before turning his attention back to Margaret. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone growing more concerned. Margaret took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto Emily's. "It's about her," she said quietly, nodding toward the young woman standing by the window. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she felt all eyes in the room turn toward her. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Panic gripped her as she wondered if Margaret had somehow discovered the truth about the deception, if she knew that Emily wasn't really their daughter. But then Margaret said something that took Emily's breath away, something that made her world spin on its axis. "She's not just any nurse," Margaret said, her voice trembling with emotion. "She's our daughter, Harold. She's Elizabeth." The room fell silent as the weight of Margaret's words hung in the air. Emily felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, as though the very fabric of reality had been torn apart. She stared at Margaret in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. Harold's reaction was immediate. He stared at Emily, his eyes wide with shock, his breath catching in his throat. What are you saying, Margaret?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's expression softened as she looked at Harold, her own eyes filled with tears. "I know it's hard to believe," she said softly, "but it's true. I've spent years searching for her, trying to find out what happened to our daughter. And now, by some miracle, she's standing right here in front of us." Emily felt her legs weaken, her mind reeling with the revelation. She had spent the past week pretending to be Elizabeth, playing a role to bring comfort to a dying man. But now, to be told that she was actually the daughter she had been pretending to be, it was too much to process. Harold's eyes filled with tears as he looked at Emily, his voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief. "Elizabeth?" he whispered, his voice filled with longing. Emily's heart ached as she saw the hope in his eyes, the desperate need to believe that what Margaret was saying was true. She wanted to speak, to say something that would make sense of the chaos that had just been unleashed, but she was at a loss for words. The shock of the revelation had left her speechless, her mind unable to keep up with the reality that was unfolding before her. Margaret took a step closer, her gaze softening as she looked at Emily. "I know this is overwhelming," she said gently, "but I've been searching for you for so long. I never gave up hope that one day we would be reunited. And now, here you are, right in front of me." Emily felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked at Margaret, the woman who had just claimed her as her daughter. She didn't know what to believe, didn't know how to reconcile the life she had known with the truth that was being laid before her. All she knew was that her world had just been turned upside down. Harold, still reeling from the shock, reached out to Emily, his hand trembling as he grasped hers. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "Is it really you? Have you really come back to us?" Emily felt a sob rise in her throat as she looked at Harold, the man she had come to care for so deeply. She could see the hope in his eyes, the desperate need to believe that his daughter had returned to him. And in that moment, she realized that she couldn't deny him the comfort he so desperately sought. With tears streaming down her face, Emily nodded, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Yes, Dad. It's me. I'm Elizabeth." The words felt strange on her lips, but as soon as she spoke them, she knew they were true. The memories of her childhood began to flood back, memories that had been buried deep within her mind for years. She remembered the garden where she used to play, the sound of her father's laughter, the warmth of her mother's embrace. It all came rushing back, a torrent of emotions that left her breathless. Harold's face lit up with a joy that Emily had never seen before. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as tears streamed down his face. "I never stopped looking for you," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I never gave up hope that one day we would be together again." Emily clung to him, her own tears mingling with his as she realized that the bond they had formed over the past week was real, more real than she had ever imagined. She had been pretending to be Elizabeth, but in truth, she had been rediscovering who she really was. Margaret joined them, wrapping her arms around both Harold and Emily, her own tears flowing freely. "We're a family again," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "After all these years, we're finally a family again." The lawyer, who had remained silent throughout the emotional reunion, cleared his throat softly, drawing their attention. "I know this is an emotional moment," he said gently, "but there are some legal matters we need to discuss." Harold nodded, still holding on to Emily, as if he feared she might disappear again. "Of course," he said, his voice steadying as he wiped away his tears. "What do we need to do?" The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "These are the documents for your estate," he explained. "Given the recent developments, we may need to make some changes." Harold glanced at Margaret, then back at the lawyer. "Yes," he said quietly. "We'll need to update everything. Elizabeth is back, and I want to make sure she's taken care of." Emily's heart swelled with emotion as she listened to Harold's words. She had spent so many years feeling lost, disconnected from her past. But now, in this moment, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before. She was home, and she was loved. As the lawyer began to go over the details of the estate, Emily felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had found her family, and they had found her, and together they would face whatever the future held, united by the bond that had been restored against all odds. And as she sat between her parents, holding their hands, Emily knew that she had finally come home. The weight of the moment is almost unbearable as Emily, Harold, and Margaret grapple with the staggering revelation that has upended their lives. Emily's hands tremble as she holds the documents, each word etched into her memory, confirming what she has just been told. Her breath catches in her throat as she processes the realization that the man she has been comforting for the past week is not just a patient, but her own father, a father she never knew she had. Margaret watches her daughter with a mixture of hope and fear. She had spent so many years searching for her, only to have her efforts end in despair. Now the daughter she thought lost forever stands before her, and Margaret's heart aches with the longing to make up for lost time. She takes a tentative step toward Emily, her voice breaking as she speaks. "Emily, I thought I'd lost you forever," Margaret says, her voice thick with emotion. "I've dreamed of this moment for so long, but I never imagined it would happen like this." Emily's eyes well with tears as she looks at her mother, the pain of her lost years mingling with the newfound joy of discovering her true family. She searches Margaret's face, looking for any sign of the woman she vaguely remembers from her early childhood. There is a flicker of recognition, but it is buried beneath the layers of time and the fog of forgotten memories. I don't know what to say," Emily whispers, her voice trembling. "I've spent my whole life wondering who I am, where I came from. And now, to find out like this," Harold, lying in bed, watches his daughter with a mixture of awe and disbelief. His heart, already weakened by illness, feels like it might burst with the overwhelming emotions coursing through him. The daughter he thought he had lost forever is standing before him, and he can hardly believe his eyes. He struggles to sit up, his frail body protesting the effort, but he is determined to be closer to her. "Emily," Harold says, his voice hoarse and filled with longing. "I've missed so much, so many years lost, but I'm so grateful you're here now." Tears spill down Emily's cheeks as she hears the raw emotion in her father's voice. She had never imagined that the man she had been caring for was the father she had longed to know. The connection she felt with him over the past week suddenly makes sense. This bond was not born of pity or duty, but of blood and love, even if they hadn't known it at the time. Margaret reaches out, her hand shaking as she touches Emily's shoulder. "We've lost so much time, but we can make up for it. We can be a family again." Emily looks between her parents, feeling an overwhelming mix of emotions. She had spent her life searching for a place where she belonged, and now, in the most unexpected way, she had found it. But the weight of the years lost, the pain of not knowing, and the suddenness of the truth is almost too much to bear. "I've always wondered about my real family," Emily says, her voice breaking. "I never imagined it would be like this, and I don't know if I can just step into this life." Harold's heart aches at his daughter's words, knowing that he has so little time left to mend the wounds of the past. "Emily, I know it's not fair to ask, but I want you to know that I've never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. You were always in my heart, even when I thought I'd lost you." Emily's tears flow freely now, the enormity of the situation pressing down on her. "I wish I could remember you. I wish I hadn't lost all those years." Margaret gently squeezes Emily's shoulder. "We can make new memories, Emily. We can start over. It won't be easy, but we can do it together." Emily nods, though her heart is heavy with the knowledge that her time with Harold is limited. She had only just found him, and already she is losing him. But she knows that she cannot let fear or regret hold her back from this chance at a family, a chance she had thought was lost to her forever. The lawyer, who had remained silent throughout the emotional exchange, steps forward. "I understand this is a lot to take in," he says gently, "but I want you to know that legally, everything is in order. Harold's will has been updated to reflect this new information. Emily, you are his rightful heir." Emily's head spins as she tries to comprehend the lawyer's words. The fortune, the estate, the legacy, it all feels surreal, like something out of a story. But more than that, the thought of being her father's daughter, of finally knowing where she came from, is almost too much to process. "I don't care about the money," Emily says quietly. "I just want to know my family." Harold's eyes fill with tears at her words. "And you will, Emily. You will. I'm so proud of the woman you've become, even though I wasn't there to see it. But I'm here now, and we can make the most of the time we have left." Margaret steps closer, her heart swelling with love for the daughter she had thought lost forever. "We can do this, Emily, together. We can be a family again." Emily looks at her parents, feeling the weight of their words and the love they are offering her. She knows that the road ahead will be difficult, filled with challenges and the pain of lost years. But she also knows that she has been given a second chance, a chance to heal, to love, and to be loved in return. As the night wears on, the family continues to talk, sharing stories, memories, and dreams for the future. They laugh, they cry, and they hold each other close, savoring the time they have together. Harold, though weak and fading, feels a sense of peace and contentment that he has not known in years. His heart, though burdened with illness, is full of love for the daughter he never thought he'd see again. Finally, as the night deepens and the room grows quiet, Harold's eyes begin to close, his breathing slowing. Emily, sitting close to him, holds his hand tightly, her tears mingling with her love for the father she has just found. "I love you, Dad," Emily whispers, the words carrying all the emotions she has held back. Harold smiles, his final breath leaving him as he slips away, his heart full of peace. Margaret and Emily remain by his side, their hands intertwined, finding solace in each other's presence. The truth has been revealed, and with it, a family has been reunited, healing the wounds of the past and forging a bond that will last beyond Harold's final breath. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.